The CEO wasn't breathing. Marcus Rivera, a janitor making $15 an hour, had maybe 2 minutes to save her life. He didn't know that doing the right thing would cost him everything. 3 minutes earlier, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly above Marcus as he pushed his cleaning cart down Sterling Tech's executive corridor, the scent of disinfectant trailing behind him like a shadow. His steps were steady, practiced. He moved like a man who knew how to shrink himself to fit the world's narrow expectations. He paused outside Conference Room Omega. Through the frosted glass, silhouettes flickered, executives gesturing, pacing, shaking their heads over whatever crisis had kept them late. Marcus didn't look long. He'd learned that a custodian who lingered too close to power invited suspicion, like he was eavesdropping on secrets not meant for him. Marcus reached for the mop when a sudden, sharp thud came from inside the conference room. Voices flared. "Victoria? Ms. Blackwood? Someone call 911. The CEO. Marcus froze for half a heartbeat before instinct pulled him forward. He shoved the conference door open, and chaos swallowed him. Executives clustered around the head of the table, pale and panicked. A woman lay across the polished surface, her blonde hair spilling over the edge, her face drained of color. Victoria Blackwood, 36 years old, the youngest CEO in Sterling Tech history. The woman steering a $16 billion enterprise. She wasn't breathing. "Move," Marcus shouted, pushing forward. A hand clamped onto his chest. Gerald Hutchins, the CFO, eyes bulging with indignation. "Absolutely not. You're not trained for this." "I am," Marcus snapped, voice hard as steel. "Move." He shoved past Gerald. The executives gasped, not because of the urgency, but because someone like him had dared touch someone like Gerald. Marcus dropped to his knees beside Victoria. Her chest was still, her lips turning faintly blue. He tilted her head back gently, checking her airway the way he'd been taught years ago in a community safety class he once took, because he worried Elijah might choke on food one day. He locked his hands and began compressions. 1, 2, 3. "Stop him," Gerald barked. "Security." Marcus didn't stop. The world narrowed to the rhythm beneath his palms. He pushed, harder each time, sweat gathering at his temples. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. "Back away," a security guard yelled, grabbing Marcus's shoulder. Marcus shrugged him off. "She's dying." Executives flinched. Gerald hissed like he'd been personally insulted. "This is unacceptable behavior from staff." 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Victoria's body jerked faintly, a tremor barely there. Paramedics rushed in at last. The moment Marcus released pressure, security dragged him back so violently he slammed into the wall. He didn't fight. He watched the paramedics take over, relief washing through him as one of them nodded in his direction. "You kept her alive," the paramedics said. But security didn't loosen their grip. They escorted him from the room like he was the threat, like saving a life was a crime. Outside, winter wind slapped him across the face. He stood on the sidewalk, breath sharp in the cold, watching his own exhale turn to frost. Victoria Blackwood was alive. He should have been relieved. But all he felt was humiliation. Marcus walked home through the cold. When he opened the door, Elijah stirred on the couch and stumbled into his arms, small and warm. Marcus held him longer than usual, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and crayons. Mrs. Dawson emerged from the kitchen. "You're home early." Marcus forced a smile. "Just a long night." He tucked Elijah into bed and whispered, "Good night, champ." For 5 minutes, the world felt normal. By morning, everything had changed. Morning came with a sharp vibration on his phone. "Your employee badge has been deactivated." Marcus blinked. That had to be a glitch. He grabbed his jacket, thin, fraying at the cuffs, and hurried to Sterling Tech. Snow had frozen on the sidewalks overnight, crunching under his shoes. Security blocked him before he could even reach the lobby. "You're not allowed inside." "I work here," Marcus said. "My badge isn't scanning. HR will handle it." 10 minutes later, a woman from HR stepped outside, holding a clipboard. She wouldn't meet his eyes. "Mr. Rivera, your employment has been terminated effective immediately." Marcus's stomach dropped. "For what?" "For inappropriate physical contact with senior personnel." His mind spun. I saved her life. There was an altercation, she said flatly. Reports indicate aggressive behavior. Reports. Marcus repeated, stunned. Gerald, he grabbed me. Your final paycheck will be mailed. Good day. The box they handed him felt like a coffin. Elijah's drawing. His spare gloves. A crushed granola bar. 5 years of work reduced to cardboard. Marcus stepped into the cold and felt something hollow open inside him. He had saved a life, and someone had erased his. If this moment hits you the way it hits me, stay with this story. What comes next reveals just how far one good man can fall for doing the right thing. He walked home in numb silence. When he opened the apartment door, Elijah noticed something instantly. Dad, why are you sad? Marcus knelt, pulling Elijah close. I'm not sad, buddy. Just tired. But by nightfall, the internet had already twisted the truth. A cropped security clip showed Marcus leaning over Victoria, stripped of context. Headline screamed, Custodian overpowers CEO, Untrained worker endangers executive life. Sterling Tech responds to incident. Marcus's phone flooded with rejection emails. His landlord taped an eviction warning to his door. Mrs. Dawson brought soup he couldn't eat. He barely slept, barely ate. His body weakened. Stress hollowed him out until even standing felt like a chore. Days blurred. Elijah watched him with frightened eyes, trying to understand why the strongest person he knew suddenly couldn't lift himself from the bed. On the 4th day, Marcus stood to make Elijah breakfast, and his legs gave out. Dad, Elijah screamed, grabbing him as he collapsed on the kitchen floor. Marcus tried to smile. I'm just dizzy. But his skin burned with fever. His breaths came ragged. The apartment was freezing, the heat shut off for non-payment. The fridge practically empty. Elijah sat beside him on the cold linoleum, whispering to him, trying to shake him awake. Marcus slipped in and out of consciousness. The ceiling blurred. The room spun. Elijah's cries echoed through the haze. Please wake up. Dad, please. Marcus couldn't. The collapse swallowed him whole. Marcus is at the lowest point a man can reach, and Elijah is all alone in the world. If you're rooting for this father and son, stay with this story, because the moment that changes everything is coming. He didn't hear the knocking at the door. Didn't hear Elijah whisper, I can't open it. Dad said not to. Didn't hear the lock slide. Didn't see the woman who stepped inside and froze at the sight of him on the floor. He didn't hear her voice, sharp with fear, then soft with guilt, when she whispered, Oh my God, Marcus. Victoria Blackwood had come to find the man who saved her life, and found him dying alone. Marcus did not remember the ambulance's siren so much as the sudden pressure of hands, paramedics working with calm, efficient movements while Elijah sobbed at the doorway, clinging to a stranger's coat like a lifeline. Victoria had not left his side. She had knelt on the floor and held his hand until they loaded him into the stretcher. Her fingers were cold against his fevered skin, but she refused to let go. At Lakeside Medical Center, the lights were too bright, the beeps too sharp. Nurses moved through the emergency room like a separate kind of air, purposeful and efficient. Marcus was admitted, blood drawn, fluids started, antibiotics ordered. A doctor pronounced him severely dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering the kind of respiratory infection that flourishes in bodies already weakened by stress. The words landed on Victoria like verdicts. It's the stress, the doctor said softly to Victoria and Sophia, who had arrived and hovered in the doorway. This level of physiological collapse doesn't happen overnight. He was living under continuous strain. Victoria walked to the window and watched snow feathering down the hospital's glass. Snow looked peaceful from inside a warm room. Outside, it was indifferent. She thought of the executives at Sterling Tech who had fanned the story into a wildfire without asking whether the forest might be full of sleeping children. She signed the forms, authorized care above what insurance would cover, and refused to leave Marcus's side that night. Elijah, exhausted, curled on a chair by the bed and fell into fitful sleep, head on his knees. Mrs. Dawson, summoned by an incredulous neighbor, arrived and sat with a tremulous smile, clutching a thermos she'd brought. Word moved faster than conscience. Within hours, The unedited footage Victoria had demanded the night before was no longer private. It had moved from internal evidence to an object of corporate warfare. Victoria watched the clip again, frame by frame, nauseous in a new way, at how quickly empathy can be replaced by politicking. She knew what to do first: find Marcus, make restitution, clear his name. The next morning, she walked into a board meeting as sunlight cut across the conference table. Faces around the table were familiar, some sympathetic, some calculating. Gerald Hutchins sat with a poker face that didn't reach his eyes. He'd been sharp yesterday at the emergency. Today he was measured, practiced. Victoria, the chair began, we appreciate your concern, but we must consider company liability. Reinstating Mr. Rivera or creating a visible program could expose us to legal risk. It's not about optics, Victoria said. It's about people. Gerald's fingers drummed once on the table. People are our greatest asset, yes, but we also have fiduciary responsibilities. Public perception matters. If the market smells instability, our stock drops. We have investors. You'd let that justify smearing a man who saved my life. Victoria's voice hardened. She'd expected resistance. She hadn't expected the specific coldness of it. We have to be prudent, Gerald replied. There are procedures. We can't simply react emotionally. Victoria watched him, sensing the deeper calculus beneath his words. Pride, fear, ambition, this wasn't merely about money. Gerald had spent years climbing a ladder built on certainty and control. A custodian's sudden elevation threatened the architecture that underpinned his world. She pressed. At minimum, we must ensure his medical bills are covered, that Elijah has stable housing, and that his name isn't smeared in public. Gerald considered, then nodded slowly. We will authorize medical coverage as an interim measure, but any public statement must be cleared by legal and PR. Victoria clenched her jaw but let the concession stand. It wasn't enough. Not by a long shot. Outside the corporate doors, the world howled louder. Reporters circled the hospital like scavengers. Social media splintered into debate. Some praised Marcus as a hero. Others resurrected his teenage mistakes as proof of a pattern. Someone had pulled an old juvenile record. Lawyers whispered about liability topics nobody wanted to parse on camera. Marcus's face, tired, hollow, fragile, became a motif for polarized argument. Gerald, in private, did not relish the smear campaign as some cartoon villain might. He rationalized. If we don't control the narrative, he told a small circle in an understated voice, someone will. Our priorities are protecting this company. If a scandal grows, if investors panic, jobs disappear. Not just ours. Everyone's. You'd trample one person to save thousands? His deputy asked, incredulous. It's triage, Gerald said, eyes tired. Difficult choices. The moral fog was real, not evil so much as cold calculus. That made him more dangerous. He wasn't a caricature. He was a man who had convinced himself of the lesser harm. Victoria felt the first shove of institutional resistance there, the small, polite refusals and the slow, grinding legal cautions that felt like chains. She'd expected a fight. She had not expected it to be so quietly bureaucratic, so sure it would outlast any impulse toward justice. Marcus woke to a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and lemon cleaner. Elijah was asleep on a small plastic chair, hair a tangle from sleep. Mrs. Dawson hovered, checking a thermos, folding a blanket. Marcus's throat was raw, his voice little more than a rasp. You okay? He asked, trying to sit up. You're alive, Elijah said, blinking awake and hugging him with a ferocity that made Marcus's chest hurt in a good way. He smiled despite the weakness. Victoria perched on the edge of the bed like someone holding herself up for fear of falling. You shouldn't have been alone, she said softly. Marcus looked at her, pride and shame folding like paper between his ribs. I didn't ask for anything. His voice cracked. Old habits of independence, of bearing burdens alone. You didn't have to ask, Victoria replied. I found you. I'm paying for your care. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in the slow wariness of someone who had seen charity mask control. Why? Because I saw, she said, and I can't unsee it. There was a pause, an exhale of something fragile. Marcus wanted to believe her, but a lifetime of being looked through made trust a foreign language. Outside the safe bubble of the room, things soured. Gerald's people fanned out. Legal counsel issued cautious memos. A PR team prepared a statement, neutral, sterile, that praised staff for their professionalism and promised a thorough review. It read like a translation of compassion into corporate protocol. Then a lawyer sent Victoria a message. Any public exculpatory statement could create exposure. If the company acknowledged wrongful termination before a review, it might invite lawsuits or admission of liability. The logic was steep and tight. The law wanted time, and time often favored the cautious. Victoria swallowed hard. Sooner or later, this legal tempo would become a weapon against the very people she intended to protect. Marcus's body recovered slowly. Recovery isn't a line but a slow, uneven ascent. The fever ebbed, strength returned in hesitant waves. But the psychological aftershocks were sharper than his battered limbs. He woke in the night gasping sometimes, hands moving as if to check a chest. No longer his. When he closed his eyes, images of being dragged out of the conference room, cold stares, hands on his uniform, Gerald's dismissive mouth, came back in flashes. Elijah sat with him through many of those nights, thumb pressed against his father's wrist, a small anchor. Mrs. Dawson tried to help more, bringing soup, chiding him to eat. But Marcus was stubborn. He refused offers of money at first, fought to maintain a sliver of autonomy so the world would not swallow him whole in gratitude he hadn't asked for. That resistance, his pride, became a second prison. Victoria recognized it and knew she had to do more than write checks. She started by trying to navigate the legal labyrinth. She pushed for a private settlement that would cover back pay, medical costs, and immediate housing. Legal pushed back. Gerald's counsel whispered of precedent and exposure. The board balked. Publicity could spark shareholder displeasure. The compromise presented was ugly and small. Short-term housing paid as a vendor service, medical costs covered conditionally, and a statement that a full investigation would occur. Marcus read the terms in the temporary housing contract Victoria had arranged. 3 months, renewable depending on legal findings. Stipulation that the company retained right to control publicity around his case. He looked at Elijah, who was coloring in the lap of a volunteer from the hospital's family services, and felt boxed in again. "No strings," he said finally, voice low. "I don't want strings." Victoria met his gaze. "I understand. But we have to work inside what the company allows to protect you now. It's not ideal. I know." He wanted to be angry at her, to refuse the half measure. But his body remembered the floor where he'd collapsed. He remembered Elijah curled against his chest in the ambulance. He told himself he would take the help, and then figure out how to make it right. Meanwhile, Gerald did not sit idle. He met with a media consultant in a quiet hotel room and discussed strategies to limit contagion to the company's reputation. They considered injecting the narrative that Marcus's juvenile record indicated a long-term risk. The consultant advised subtlety. "We don't run documents publicly. We let concerns leak through smaller outlets. We let the story morph." Gerald hesitated. "He saved the CEO. That complicates things," the consultant said. "But it doesn't remove the public's attention to risk. Investors worry about precedents. You have to think about the macro." Gerald had a daughter in college, an unexpected detail that humanized him in ways the boardroom never did. Her scholarship, his mortgage, the image he'd built for himself. These things mattered. He told himself the decisions he made were not personal. They were survival of his family, his career, the jobs of thousands he could not quantify without a spreadsheet. This was his justification. Not noble, not heroic, but real. The narrative war escalated in slow turns. Op-eds, anonymous tips to outlets, a leaked line here, and they're implying Marcus's past was relevant. Each drip eroded public sympathy. Victoria pushed back, quietly, strategically. She insisted the full footage be released internally to the board and argued for immediate protections for Marcus and Elijah. Some on the board bristled. Others, quietly, confessed discomfort. Victoria began to lose small fights. The legal team refused an immediate public apology. The board balked at a department named for dignity. The word restructuring became a euphemism in many meetings for reducing risk, not creating safety. Through it all, Marcus felt both invisible and under a microscope. He struggled with the idea of a public role offered to him as restitution. He had dreamed of nothing more than a steady paycheck and mornings with Elijah. The idea of leading a company initiative felt like another scripted role he hadn't auditioned for. But as he read complaints from other workers, emails Victoria shared of harassment, of unfair dismissals, he felt something stir. The same indignation that had pushed him to leap forward in conference room Omega now warmed his chest. He wanted not vengeance, but to be useful. He wanted Elijah to grow up in a world where someone like him didn't get erased. Victoria found herself continually apologizing for the company's pace. "I'm fighting to change this," she told Marcus one late evening when the hospital lights had dimmed and the building hummed with security guards and cleaning crews. "They push back because this is a threat to how they operate. That's not an excuse. That's a fact." Marcus's reply was soft. "Don't make it your cross to carry alone. I don't want you burned for me. I don't plan to be a martyr," she said. "I plan to be inconvenient." Her humor was small but honest. She'd lost the belief that quick fixes could do the work. Instead, she mapped a plan: small public steps, private protections, a phased initiative that started with anonymous complaint channels and immediate protections for whistleblowers, the kind of scaffolding that might actually survive legal scrutiny. It wasn't heroic. It would be messy, legalistic, incomplete. But it was something. They moved to the temporary housing Victoria had organized. It was a second-floor walk-up, small but warm. Elijah raced the light into the living room and declared the couch a fortress. Marcus watched him and laughed for the first time in weeks, a soft sound that felt like water thawing ice. But the war over narrative continued. A conservative outlet published an article hinting at Marcus's past, framing it as context. A streaming commentator, smelling controversy, speculated about danger and boundaries. Marcus's phone buzzed constantly with strangers' opinions, some supportive, some cruel. The room felt smaller when the world talked and judged. One night, Marcus sat on the couch with Elijah asleep in his lap and opened an email Victoria had shown him. A list of complaints from employees over 5 years, small things, big things, voices that had been ignored. He read in silence, the edges of his resolve sharpening. He felt his anger channel into something clearer than shame. Perhaps, he thought, the work would never be neat. Perhaps the reform would always be an argument. Perhaps he would have to fight and accept that victory might be a conversation, a policy, a single life saved from humiliation. Victoria knocked on his door that night and sat with him while the city softened into rain. "We start small," she said. "We create structures that are legally defensible and morally honest. We don't pretend to sweep everything away overnight, but we do not walk away." Marcus listened and then nodded. He still had doubts. He still feared being used as a symbol. But the hard kernel of him, the man who had pressed his hands into Victoria's chest without thinking of rank, stirred. "We'll make it messy," he said finally, "but we make it real." Victoria reached across and squeezed his hand. Outside, Chicago breathed, cold, patient, indifferent. Inside, a plan took shape that would test them all in ways the board couldn't legislate away. Victoria finally knows the truth. But knowing isn't enough. She has to face the system she built. Tell me in the comments what you think she should do next, and share this story with someone who needs hope tonight. The first day Marcus was well enough to step outside, the city air hit him with a cold clarity that almost woke something dormant in him. He walked slowly beside Victoria toward the small cafe around the corner from the temporary apartment, Elijah gripping his coat sleeve like letting go might erase his father again. Marcus still moved carefully. His strength hadn't fully returned, and every sudden noise made his muscles tighten. The world was familiar, but his place in it no longer was. Inside the cafe, whispers fluttered like anxious birds. People recognized him, the man from the viral video. Some smiled sympathetically. Others looked away quickly, embarrassed by their curiosity. A few stared openly, judgment unfiltered. Marcus felt their eyes like weight on his back. He hated it. He set down the menu. Maybe this was a mistake, he murmured. Victoria shook her head gently. No. Leaving your home after what you've endured takes courage. He didn't respond. Courage, a word that once meant shows of strength, saving someone's life, now seemed to mean simply existing in public without collapsing. While they waited for their drinks, Victoria leaned forward. I have a proposal, and I want to say this clearly. You are not obligated to accept it. Marcus exhaled. He had expected this conversation eventually. I've pitched a revised initiative, she explained. A task force instead of a full department. Legally safer, politically less threatening. It focuses on safety, worker dignity, and equitable review practices. You wouldn't be a figurehead. You'd advise, build, design systems. And you'd get real authority, slowly, in phases. Marcus looked at the spoon in his hand, turning it absently. This place almost killed me. I know, she whispered. I know. And you think I can walk back in there like nothing happened? No, she said. Not like nothing happened. But maybe like something should happen. Something needs to change. And maybe you're the one person who understands how. He looked away, jaw tightening. You're asking me to heal the place that broke me. I'm asking you to help build something better, she said, voice soft but unwavering. Not fast. Not easy. Real. Elijah climbed into Marcus's lap and rested his head on his chest. Marcus threaded his fingers through the boy's curls, grounding himself in the steady rise and fall of Elijah's breath. He didn't say yes. Not yet. But he didn't say no. The board did not greet Victoria's updated plan with applause. What you're proposing, one director began sternly, could expose us legally. If we create an advisory task force with an employee who is at the center of an ongoing controversy. Marcus is not a liability, Victoria said evenly. He is a survivor of our negligence, and he is willing to help us fix what failed him. And what of the optics? Another director asked. Some investors already fear you're being too reactive. Good, Victoria said. They should fear complacency. Gerald, sitting 2 seats down, interjected mildly. With respect, Victoria, you're creating a role for someone still under public scrutiny. Perhaps we wait until legal finishes the review. We don't want to appear reckless. She looked at him, sensing again the careful calculation behind that calm tone. He wasn't being openly hostile, not anymore. He was being strategic, a slow suffocation rather than a dagger. We don't have the luxury of waiting, she said. Not when employees are already coming forward. And yet, Gerald replied, we cannot move without legal clearance. You know that. There it was, the net tightening. The board wanted to keep everything still. Gerald wanted to slow everything down until the truth lost urgency. Victoria wanted movement, but momentum required consensus she didn't yet have. Then we make Marcus's involvement informal to start, she said. Consultation only. No title yet. A few heads nodded, reluctantly. It wasn't the victory she wanted, but it wasn't defeat. What neither she nor Marcus knew was that Gerald had begun meeting secretly with 2 board members who feared upheaval more than injustice. Not overt conspirators, just men who preferred stability and good quarterly reports. They whispered concerns about Victoria's judgment, her emotional involvement, her impulsive reforms. Maybe she's too young for this role. Maybe she's letting guilt drive her decisions. Maybe she's becoming a risk to the company. Nothing concrete, just seeds. Seeds grow in the dark. Marcus struggled too, in ways no meeting minutes ever captured. His first step back into Sterling Tech came on a Saturday morning, long before employees arrived. Victoria had arranged it that way. Less pressure, less noise. She walked beside him through the glass front doors, Elijah skipping ahead, small footsteps echoing on the marble. Marcus's breath hitched as he stepped into the lobby. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish, just like the nights he spent cleaning floors alone. His eyes roamed over the reception desk, the wide staircase, the metal detectors. He had walked these floors thousands of times. But today his body felt foreign inside them. He touched the rail leading up to the executive floor. His hand shook. Elijah glanced back. Dad, you okay? Yeah, Marcus said, though his voice rasped. They walked slowly down the hallway where the security guard had once pinned him against the wall. Marcus's chest tightened, his throat closed. He tried to swallow but couldn't. Victoria placed a gentle hand on his arm. "We stop," she said quietly. "We breathe." He stopped. He breathed. He didn't fall apart. Later that afternoon, they sat together in a small glass conference room where Elijah played with building blocks on the floor. Victoria opened her laptop. "This is the first round of complaints employees have submitted," she said. Marcus stared at the screen. One complaint, then another, then 20. Not harassment cases, not outlandish scandals, just people describing small humiliations, being ignored, being dismissed, being talked down to, being denied opportunities with no explanation. Policies applied unevenly, rules bent for some, weaponized for others. Marcus felt the weight of it. "You didn't tell me it was this many." "These are just from 1 week," she said softly. He leaned back, absorbing it. "It's not just me." "No," she whispered. "It's not." He closed his eyes, feeling a slow, grounded anger, the kind that didn't explode but expanded, the kind that didn't burn him from the inside but warmed him enough to stand. He opened his eyes. "Okay," he whispered. "Let's do the work." Victoria nodded. Elijah looked up at him with pride so pure it hurt. But nothing moved quietly for long. That afternoon, a news notification flashed across Marcus's phone. Then another. Then a dozen at once. Someone had leaked details from his juvenile record again, this time accompanied by commentary alleging a long pattern of conflict with authority. The image of his teenage mugshot, tired eyes, scared expression, popped up across the internet like a weapon. He froze. Elijah leaned closer, confused. "Dad, why is that picture everywhere?" Marcus swallowed hard. "Because some people don't want others to change." Victoria's phone buzzed violently. She scanned the headline, then looked up at Marcus with a fury so sharp it almost trembled. "He did this," she whispered. "Gerald did this." "Maybe," Marcus said quietly. But maybe he wasn't alone. He wasn't naive anymore. Victoria exhaled through clenched teeth. "Then we respond." Marcus shook his head. "No, we don't outrun lies with louder noise. I need to say something. In my own way." He stood slowly, turning toward Elijah. "Buddy, I did something when I was young. Something I regret. But I did it because I was scared. Because I thought I had no other choice." Elijah nodded solemnly. "I still love you." Marcus's breath caught. Victoria touched his shoulder gently. "If you want to speak to the staff, you should. Not polished. Not rehearsed. Just you." He nodded. He wasn't ready. But maybe he didn't need to be. That night, Victoria added her own strategy. She requested an emergency meeting with the board to address the leak and the escalating hostility. 2 members declined. One suggested postponing her concerns until after quarterly reports. Gerald smiled politely throughout the entire discussion, hands folded, saying little, but watching everything. Victoria realized the truth. She wasn't fighting one man. She was fighting a culture. She walked out of the boardroom that night and texted Marcus. "Tomorrow, we speak. All of us." And for the first time since the collapse, Marcus felt something take root inside him. Not confidence, but resolve. Marcus is about to reclaim his voice and confront an entire system that tried to erase him. If this story is moving you, stay with it, because the turning point is here. The next morning, the building felt different. Not quieter, not louder, just waiting. Word had spread that the CEO had called an all-staff meeting. Not for a quarterly update, not for a merger, for something else. In the hallways, people whispered, glanced at their phones, glanced at one another. No one knew what was coming. But everyone felt the shift, like the building itself had stopped breathing for a moment. Victoria stood backstage in the large multipurpose atrium, adjusting the mic clipped to her jacket. The board had refused to formally sanction the meeting. Legal had advised postponement. PR had begged her to speak in vague terms and avoid admitting fault. She ignored all of them. This wasn't a PR crisis. This was a moral reckoning. Marcus stood beside her, adjusting the sleeves of a borrowed dress shirt. Elijah sat quietly on a folding chair behind him, drawing shapes on a clipboard someone had handed him. Marcus's hands trembled, and he tried to steady them. Victoria noticed and gently placed her hand over his. "You don't have to be perfect," she said softly. "You just have to be honest." Marcus nodded. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Good," she replied. "That means you're not lying to yourself." When the coordinator gestured, Victoria stepped forward. The crowd settled instantly. Every department was represented. Janitors in their uniforms, interns in wrinkled shirts, engineers in hoodies, managers in tailored suits. Some faces held curiosity, some suspicion, some empathy, but all were watching. Victoria stood tall. "Thank you for being here," she began. "I called this meeting because something happened in this building, something that revealed failures we can no longer ignore." Silence settled, thick and expectant. "A man saved my life," she continued, "and our system punished him for it." Murmurs rippled through the room. Discomfort, guilt, realization. "It wasn't one person's fault," she said. "It was many small choices, many small injustices. A culture that looked upward but rarely downward. And I am responsible for that culture." Some managers shifted uncomfortably. A few HR reps stared at their shoes. Victoria turned slightly, gesturing to the side of the stage. "I want you to hear from the person at the center of it. Not a memo, not a rumor, a human being." Marcus stepped out. The room grew still, so still the sound of his breath felt loud in his ears. He approached the microphone. Elijah watched him with wide, hopeful eyes from backstage. Marcus swallowed once, hands trembling visibly. He didn't hide it. He didn't have the energy to pretend. I don't know how to do this," he began. His voice was rough but steady. "I'm not a speaker. I'm not a leader. I'm a janitor who had a really bad month." A few people chuckled nervously. Most stayed silent. "I keep trying to rehearse something, but every time I practice, I forget my words. My mind goes blank. My hands start shaking like this." He lifted his trembling fingers. The honesty cut through the room like oxygen. "So I'm just going to talk. And if I mess up, that's life, I guess." He breathed in, slow and shaky. "The day I saved Victoria, I didn't think. I just acted. I saw someone dying, and I thought, if this was me, I'd want someone to try. That's it. That's the whole story." His voice cracked on the last word. And then suddenly, I was dangerous. A headline. A problem. People who had walked past me every day without ever saying hello suddenly had opinions about who I was. Everyone had a story, but none of them were mine. A man in a suit scoffed loudly. "Here we go." Someone elbowed him to be quiet. Marcus swallowed. "My son, Elijah, he got scared. He asked me if I was going to disappear. He asked if I was a bad man. I didn't know how to answer. Because part of me still believes the things people say about me. Part of me believes I'm not worth much." He wiped his face with the back of his hand, breath unsteady. "I made mistakes when I was a kid. I did something stupid trying to get medicine for my mom. And the world never forgot it, even after I grew up. Even after I tried so hard to be the kind of man Elijah could look up to." He looked up, and for the first time his voice didn't shake. "Being poor is hard. Being judged is hard. Being invisible is hard. But being punished for doing the right thing." His jaw set. That broke something in me. Silence tightened across the room. I'm still scared walking these halls. Still scared people will think I'm a threat. Still scared my past is louder than my present. But I'm here. I'm here because someone has to be. A man in the back row stood and walked out. The door clicked behind him. Two others whispered to each other. But then, slowly, a woman in a custodial uniform lifted her hand. Then another from security. Then Denise from the night shift stood up and said, "We hear you, Marcus." A handful of others clapped softly. Not a standing ovation. Not a cinematic swell. Just small, human acknowledgments from people who understood. And it was enough. Marcus stepped back, wiping his eyes. He didn't smile, but he breathed. One full, unbroken breath. Elijah ran into his arms. Marcus held him with both hands, grounding himself in the weight of his son's small body. Victoria took the stage again. Her voice shook, not with fear, but with conviction. "This is not a clean story," she said. "And what comes next won't be clean either. But today we begin." She outlined reforms, not sweeping fantasies, but tangible changes. A mandatory oversight committee, a protected channel for worker complaints, a phased dignity initiative external audits, no retaliation without immediate legal review. Manager stiffened. HR scribbled hurried notes. A few board members exchanged irritated glances. Good. Progress required discomfort. If Marcus's courage hits you right now, you're not alone. Stay with this story, because real change is about to get messy. The weeks after the meeting were not triumphant. They were work. Real work. Messy work. Some employees thanked Marcus quietly. Some avoided him entirely. One senior developer told him bluntly, "Your presence makes people nervous." A junior designer told him, "Your speech made my supervisor furious." Marcus didn't fight every battle, but he fought the ones that mattered. Calls came in from employees who had never spoken up before. Some of them had real grievances. Some wanted revenge for old slights. Marcus learned fast. Helping people meant telling some of them no. He helped reopen the case of a young woman from data processing who filed a complaint alleging her supervisor had retaliated after she questioned a scheduling change. Marcus sat in on the review panel. HR wanted a mediated conversation. Legal wanted a cautious approach. Marcus wanted truth. The supervisor walked in confident, arms crossed. "This is ridiculous," he said. "She's been difficult. That's all." The young woman trembled as she spoke. "He cut my hours because I asked why I wasn't considered for promotion." HR asked for documentation. The supervisor had it. The young woman did not. Power imbalance, disguised as paperwork. Marcus could feel the injustice pulsing like heat in the room. He leaned forward. "You changed her schedule 2 hours after she asked about the promotion. It's within my managerial rights." "Rights aren't the same as fairness," Marcus said quietly. The supervisor scoffed. "Who are you to tell me about fairness?" Silence fell. A dangerous one. Marcus inhaled. "Someone who knows what retaliation feels like." The supervisor faltered just slightly, but the policy wouldn't save the young woman today. HR recommended a temporary compromise and scheduled follow-up assessments. The young woman left with watery eyes and a forced smile. "Thank you for trying," she murmured. Marcus sat in the empty room afterward, hands clenched, jaw tight. Progress wasn't a straight line. It wasn't even a road. It was a field of thorns. Elijah struggled too. He cried one night. Quietly, the way children do when they think it makes them braver. Kids at school said Dad was going to jail. Marcus gathered him into his arms. "I'm not going anywhere. Promise." Marcus hesitated, but only for a fraction of a heartbeat. "Promise." Elijah pressed his face into Marcus's neck. "I don't like when people talk about us." "I know, buddy. Me neither. Why can't they be nice?" Marcus exhaled. "Because some people don't understand things unless it happens to them." "Will it get better?" Elijah whispered. Marcus kissed the top of his head. "Yeah," he said, even though he wasn't sure. "But we make it better together." Elijah nodded, small and brave. Meanwhile, Gerald was not disappearing into defeat. His resignation wasn't a fall, it was a pivot. He met quietly with 2 investors who felt Victoria had become too emotional. He advised them on alternative leadership strategies. He fed subtle narratives into select financial circles, nothing overtly malicious, just enough to weaken confidence in Victoria's long-term stability. His power had changed shape. It hadn't vanished. Victoria didn't escape untouched. Her relationship with her sister frayed further. One night her sister called. "You missed Dad's memorial dinner," she said. Victoria winced. I had an emergency at work." "Isn't it always work?" She had no answer. The silence stretched. "Vicky," her sister said softly, "you can't save everyone." Victoria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "No," she whispered, "but I can try not to destroy the ones who saved me." She went inside, sat at her kitchen counter, and allowed herself to cry. Silent, fierce tears she hadn't let fall in years. When the sobs subsided, she wiped her face, inhaled, and reopened her laptop. Her fight wasn't over. She developed migraines that left her sitting in dark rooms for hours. Sophia began keeping a bottle of water and painkillers at her desk for her. She received an anonymous email one night. "You're ruining this company. Step down." She deleted it. Then she cried alone in her office. But she stayed. Because Marcus stayed. Because Elijah stayed. Because sometimes the only thing harder than leaving is continuing. Then came the final setback. A whistleblower contacted Marcus anonymously through the new Dignity portal. There's a manager threatening to fire anyone who uses the system. HR is covering it up. I'm scared. Please help us. Marcus's stomach dropped when he read it. His hands went cold. Not again. Please, not again. He forwarded it to Victoria immediately. She called an emergency meeting with legal and HR. The mood was tense, cautious. Legal wanted to assess the claim's validity before acting. HR suggested a preliminary inquiry. Victoria's jaw tightened. We act now. If there's retaliation happening, every hour we wait makes it worse. We need evidence, the legal counsel said. The complaint is evidence. Marcus said, voice harder than he intended. The room went quiet. It took 2 days to identify the manager, a mid-level operations director named Stevens who'd been with the company for 12 years. He had supporters. He had allies. And when confronted, he had lawyers. I was clarifying expectations, Stevens said coolly in the HR meeting. Not threatening anyone. But when investigators interviewed employees under Stevens's supervision, 3 confirmed the threats. One had recorded a conversation on her phone. The case exploded internally. Legal froze progress on other reforms while they contained the Stevens situation. The board panicked. PR urged silence. Victoria slammed her fist on her desk hard enough to bruise. We cannot let this stop everything else. Marcus felt dread pool in his stomach. He sat alone in his small office one evening, staring at the complaint on his screen, and felt the weight of it crushing him. I can't keep fighting a war that grows arms, he told Victoria when she found him there. You're not fighting alone, she responded. Not anymore. She meant it. And for the first time, Marcus believed her. It took 3 more weeks of investigation, real investigation, not the polite wash the company used to do. Stevens was suspended pending further review. The HR partner who tried to bury the complaint was demoted. The employees involved were protected and transferred to different departments at their request. But the process left everyone shaken. Trust in the new system felt fragile. Some employees questioned whether it was safe to come forward at all. Marcus nearly quit that week. He sat on the edge of his bed one night, head in his hands, and whispered to himself, "What if I'm making it worse?" Elijah crawled into his lap. "You're not, Dad. You're making it real." Marcus looked at his son, 8 years old and wiser than he had any right to be. "When did you get so smart?" Marcus asked. "You taught me," Elijah said simply. Marcus held him and cried quietly. If Marcus's journey moved you, if you believe dignity shouldn't depend on status, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support helps stories like this reach people who need hope today. 6 months later, the company wasn't healed, but it was healing. Small things changed. Employees spoke more in meetings. The HR stopped closing cases quietly. Managers learned to listen before defending. New hires said they felt safe. Not everyone changed. Some middle managers still resented the oversight. Some executives still grumbled about inefficiency. Some employees still whispered when Marcus walked past. But more people, slowly, steadily, began to speak up. Marcus sat in a modest office reviewing cases with 2 colleagues who respected him deeply. Elijah visited after school, running into his father's arms and sitting on his lap while Marcus typed notes. The young woman from data processing sent him an email one afternoon. "I got the promotion. Thank you for not giving up on me." Marcus read it 3 times, throat tight. Progress wasn't a victory lap. It was moments like this. One afternoon, Marcus stood by the window overlooking the city. The skyline stretched out before him, glass and steel and 1,000 stories he'd never know. Elijah appeared beside him, tugging his sleeve. "Dad, are you happy now?" Marcus thought for a long moment. Not about perfection, not about victory, about better. He looked down at the building that once broke him and now allowed him to help rebuild it. "I don't know yet, buddy," he said honestly, "but I'm still here. And that's something." Elijah leaned against him. "That's a lot, Dad." Marcus nodded, pulling his son close. "Yeah," he whispered. "Maybe it is." He wasn't invisible anymore. Not because the world finally saw him, but because he refused to disappear.